Following up on last video I've done on Manhunt 2, about the remaining mysteries in the 0.01 PSP build, I wanted to dive into some theories about the hypothetical PS2 or Xbox 0.01 build that was proposed at the end of the previous video, because I am convinced it exists. I think it's out there somewhere, whether it's on a hard drive or disk format, and it's waiting to surface someday. I don't know when it'll be, I don't know who it'll surface for, but I'm hoping it'll end up in public hands so we can properly explore Rockstar Vienna's vision for the game. And I think the vision, you can already catch glimpses of it in the 0.01 build, but I think we're still missing a lot of pieces because by then it was Rockstar London's project. And no offense to them on that, because I loved the final version of Manhunt 2, with the uncensored stuff brought back in, and mods restoring kite content. But I'd love to see what Rockstar Vienna had in mind, and based on context clues and my own theories, we're going to break down what I think would be in the hypothetical Xbox or PS2 0.01 build, from most likely to least likely, with my own explanations about them. And I know what you're thinking. Yos, aren't you just doing this to build up hype for something that might not exist in the hope that it will surface? And my answer is yes, I am doing that. I'm really hoping that these videos will draw attention to this concept, and that if there is anybody who has this sort of build, they might consider the idea of sharing it. But we'll never know till you try. This is speculation based off materials we have on hand, based off stuff we can guess, developer interviews, files from the 0.01 build, and everything else. So, the most likely items, stuff that I am sure will be in this build. From the top, the A20 or End level, the original finale for the game, set in the rebuilt Dixmoor Asylum, where Danny has to choose between getting lobotomized or killing Dr. White and ending the project. I'm convinced that's the case because this preview image was in a lot of builds of the game, and there are still audio files from it in the builds of the game, and it seems like a lot was done for it. Maybe they just didn't have room for it in the current storyline that Rockstar London was going with. But it feels like a lot was done for it, and you can see assets for it that were posted by Rockstar Vienna members, including new textures back before the downgrades happened. I think it was still there. I'm not sure how finished it was, but I think it existed in some capacity, and it's a playable format. Maybe not as polished up as the final levels, but I'm sure it was there with, like, placeholder lines and other stuff. Next would be the History Museum level with the unique environmental executions. This one I say because we already know the Guillotine existed and survived into the 0.01 build. We know they had the audio built for these unique executions. We know that Rockstar Vienna was pretty proud of this level, and they talked about how cool it was to incorporate some of these unique execution opportunities into it. The only reason I see it being cut is because they couldn't find a place for it in the story, and my guess would have been that Rockstar London had cut it because they couldn't figure out where to slot it in their revamped version of Manhunt 2. I mean, there's still a preview image for it in the PSP 0.01 build, so there's some evidence that it could have made it that far. The next point would be the beta music for Ritual Cleansing, and this one's straightforward. In the 0.01 build, Ritual Cleansing had its own music, and you can hear snippets of it in the intro to Ritual Cleansing across platforms. I don't see a reason why it would have a different soundtrack in an even earlier version of the game. My guess is that Rockstar London changed it, and in Vienna's version of the game, the music you hear would have been a higher quality version of the 0.01 songs. These next few are sort of consolidated. The beta designs for the Red Kings, the Project Militia, the SWAT, and Leo's Face. These all appeared in various stages of the game, especially the beta Red Kings, who were in every pre-release build. The beta Project Militia had their models show up in some early builds, and 0.01 gave us the full breadth of them, along with the beta SWAT. And we can see Leo's original face in the 0.01 build, where he looks younger. I'd imagine that those designs were Vienna-era decisions, and Rockstar London kept some of them, and it seems like for the Red Kings they changed them last minute, which is a shame. Then with the Project Militia and SWAT, they just changed them later on. I can get for those, because by then it wouldn't have really fit the style they were going for. A shame about the Red Kings, though. I really like their beta design. I think they were a step up from the hooded gangster look in the final game. Next would be the Revolver and Best Friends. I'm basing this on the fact the Revolver was in the PS2 AO leak of Best Friends, the 0.01 build, and the fact that you can still see footage of Leo using the Revolver and Best Friends in the final game, in Danny's flashback in the opening to Broadcast Interrupted. It seems like it was a pretty standard choice throughout. I don't know why they changed it at the last minute. Maybe because I didn't think it would be fitting for the Project Militia to carry a standard weapon like that, or maybe they wanted to give a more accessible weapon to players for their first taste of gunplay. I don't know why it was cut, but I'd imagine that was a good choice early on, that Best Friends would get you used to guns by giving you a standard civilian kind of firearm. Up next would be the Blackjack and the Pleasure Stick and Red Light, based off their appearances in the 0.01 build, and their assets still existing to some degree in the AO leak. I don't see a reason not to include them. It's a fitting weapon, even if it's a bit comedic to have the ladder weapon around. The former, I'm not sure if that was Rockstar London experimenting or not, but it still would fit the project, with their use of smaller but still handy melee weapons, stuff that could easily be used for law enforcement and things of that sort. Blackjack would be a natural fit, and would act as sort of a variant of the baton. Without specific level placements, I'd say the Machete, Newspaper, Milk Bottle, and Mace all would have shown up, because they all have proper execution animations and audios. Some of them even made into different platforms, like the Mace. The Newspaper and Milk Bottle would have been easily included, and they do appear in the 0.01 build. The Machete is kind of hidden away, but the fact that it has a jumping animation done for it, and audios and everything else, makes me think that Vienna had some plans to include it somewhere. I'm not sure what level it would have fit in. Maybe they would have kept it in Sexual Deviance, maybe in like the basement areas, or maybe it would have been something that the Project Militia would have used. It's hard to tell, but it seems like they finished way too much work on it just to cut it and leave it aside. Speaking of stuff that had a lot of work put into it, I'm firmly convinced that the Guillotine, Vending Machine, Dumpster, and Picket environmental executions would have shown up naturally in gameplay in this build. They're all done. They have audio, animations, everything else, and they, aside from the Picket, they all look fine and they play fine. The Picket probably could have used some touching up, and maybe they just couldn't finish it in time, either Vienna or Rockstar London, and as a result it got cut. But the rest look good. You could say the vending machine's a bit too goofy for the serious tone of the game, and fair enough. And maybe they just couldn't find a location for the Guillotine that would make sense. I don't know why they cut the dumpster execution, though, because it looks fine. I don't get that, but if Vienna finished it, I see no reason to leave it out. I bet they would have shown up in different levels. Maybe the vending machine in Safe House, same with the dumpster, the Picket in Domestic Disturbance, and the Guillotine in History Museum. The level 1 to 3 gun executions, which is straightforward. The files have existed for a while. They were already accessible by default in 0.01. It seems like it was a Rockstar London choice to cut them. So I'm guessing that Rockstar Vienna would have included the level 1 to 3 system instead of just the shared execution used by different firearms of the same class. This one might be a bit controversial, but I think in this build, we would have seen Cemetery and Release Therapy as real locations. I'm basing this off a few factors. I've discussed them in the previous video, but Release Therapy looks like a real location. It doesn't look dreamlike, aside from the visual effects for the enemies in the fog, and you can even turn the fog effects off in the PSP build. It looks like a standard Project holding. Looks like a Manor or something of that sort that Project employees would have owned. I don't see... I mean, in the final game it's contextualized as a part of Danny's mind, which makes sense since he did work for the Project. But it looks like a real location that Leo would have been held and one he would have had to fight his way out of. As for the cemetery, I feel like the changes to it to make it this final battle in Danny's mind were just being worked on when 0.01 was made for the PSP. Because that is the most unstable level, and no other level in the game in that build has those issues where you crash when you're trying to execute enemies, and these aren't just any enemies, these are a special class exclusive to Cemetery or Personality Clash. Like trying to execute the Ghost Watchdogs or Michael or Dr. Pickman without first clearing some issues with the checkpoints. Those cause crashes, and that doesn't happen anywhere else in the game. I think they were just starting work on that, and they had only gotten the placements down, they hadn't ironed out the bugs with them by the time that they had assembled this PSP build. And I think that's why it's so unstable. I think Danny would have really paid a visit to Wary Pines Cemetery, and it would have been a real level where there would have been actual consequences for being there. It wouldn't have been this battle inside of Danny's mind, even though, like Release Therapy, it's presented as such. As for what specifically that entailed, that's best saved for another video, but my point overall is that I think the versions we would have encountered in a 0.01 PS2 or Xbox build would have been physical locations that Danny and Leo would have been at. Speaking of levels, I think that the Project Militia would have shown up in Origins and Release Therapy, and there would have been a perv enemy in Honeypot, just like in the 0.01 build. I'm basing that off the fact that audio files for the Project Militia survived throughout development. Even in the final game, you got that, "Hey, I need backup" line. And it doesn't seem like including the Project Militia in those levels was a choice by Rockstar London. London seems to have presented them as a posthumous kind of enemy, only showing up in flashbacks and getting stomped by Leo to the point where the Watchdogs take over for them. Whereas it seems like they would have been the best of the best sent by the Project in Rockstar Vienna's version. The last resort sent in when the Watchdogs can't handle it. And I think they would have been around in Origins and Release Therapy to represent that. Maybe they would have been the enemies in A20, at least in the version where you fight Dr. White. As for the perv enemy in the Honeypot, it's a straightforward thing. I'm basing that off the fact there's one in the 0.01 build's version of it, and the fact that it ties into the Project having ties to that sort of business, and the fact that the club run by the Pervs was basically shut down by Danny and Leo, so it would make sense to shuffle personnel around, even if there's just a few guys from that gang stationed there. Speaking of some design stuff, the beta Watchdog heads with the fedoras and sunglasses and mustaches from the PSP build, maybe even the dog head one, I think they would have shown up in this build of the game, just based off their appearances in the leaked PSP build. Vienna's version of the toilet execution, as silly as it is, would probably be there, because I think Rockstar London was the one who made a more grounded and down-to-earth takedown there. The higher quality textures would be a very valuable discovery. The thing is, when the game needed to be ported to the PSP, there was an effort to make sure it could run across all platforms, and that meant downgrading texture quality across the board. The PS2 and especially the Xbox versions were going to get higher quality textures than what we got. But due to the need to simplify resources across the board, we did not get that. That's why the models still don't look so great, even compared to other PS2 games of that era, and why the Wii and PC versions are a step up by comparison. I think some of the higher quality assets would have been from those builds of the game, the Xbox and PS2 0.01 builds. Lastly, I think Red Light's ending puzzle, the one that infamously stumped me, would have been in Vienna's version. It's still kind of there in the final game, but it's set off when you reach the checkpoint area of Red Light. Whereas Rockstar Vienna had a little puzzle where you needed a throwable item to knock down the staircase and then escape up that way. And I guess Rockstar London thought the same thing that I did. Maybe they thought it was too confusing or that it wasn't too intuitive. But it's a clever puzzle, so I'm guessing Vienna, it was their call to put that in, and Rockstar's London call to take it out. That section is done. Now onto the part I'm flimsy on, the somewhat likely section. This is covering stuff that I think is possible would have been in a Rockstar Vienna build, but I also think there's a chance it would have already been cut by the time we hit 2006. In order, I think Sorority House might have been included in a 0.01 PS2 or Xbox build. The preview image for it is in the PSP 0.01 build, and we know the gist of it, that it was a flashback level, and that it would have tied into the death of Danny's family, and that the window executions would have been there. The problem is that they describe it as kind of a bland, boring level, so I don't know if it would have made the final cut, based on the entertainment value at least. It's not like History Museum, where they talked highly about it. It seems like story-wise it would have been important, but gameplay-wise it wouldn't have been all that interesting. The next level that I think I'm on the fence about is A21, or the new house level. We really don't know what that entails outside of maybe being an ending scene for one of the outcomes of A20. I'd imagine that if A20 was finished, A21 was finished as well, but that's conjecture. I don't have a lot to go on for that, so that's why I'm hesitating in putting that in the somewhat likely section. In a similar boat is the original story of Domestic Disturbance, where you play as Danny and you need to lure 3 project scientists out of their homes while the streets are patrolled by the Legion. That voice file seems to be from the Vienna era of development. It seems like voice lines were made for the story of the 0.01 Xbox and PS2 build. When Rockstar wasn't happy with it, they shelved it, and they got Rockstar London to take over. They used placeholders for the major characters until new lines could be made. And I'd imagine that the lines about the streets being patrolled by the Legion and the 3 project scientists were made when Rockstar Vienna had the voice actors in. I'm not certain if they had already cut it by that time, though. That's why I'm on the fence about it. Some design differences that I'm not certain about. It's possible that back then we would have had the orange jumpsuits for Dixmoor inmates, the Beta Legion design with the cross and the cloak, the Beta Bloodhound designs that kind of had that Captain America vibe. We know about the Beta Legion their model existed even in later builds, even though it never got used. We know about the orange Dixmoor jumpsuits based off early footage and based off cutscenes from the 0.01 PSP build. But the model itself isn't used in gameplay. I think it's possible it would have shown up in the levels before Safe House, but I'm not as certain about that. As for the Beta Legion, it looks nice, but it wouldn't have fit them as asylum patients, hence why it would have tied, I think, to Domestic Disturbance. If the original Domestic Disturbance storyline was used, then I think they would have had the Beta designs there, and the asylum designs in Awakening. But if it had already been cut by then, I'm leaning toward the Beta Legion being cut there. The beta Bloodhounds are all done and they look fine and they're finished. It's just the problem is that none of their models really made it in, aside from the Statue of Liberty one. So I'm on the fence as to whether or not they'd already decided changing the look of them. They kind of resemble a Manhunt 1 gang in that incarnation. But in Manhunt 2, they more resemble a group of militarized hunters. I'd imagine Rockstar London was trying to make them grounded and more realistic. Maybe Rockstar Vienna wanted them to look more ultra-nationalist, ultra-American. I'm on the fence, though, because maybe Rockstar Vienna had decided to start toning them down. On the note of Agent Prime, he seems like he would have been a central character to the story or a minor antagonist of some kind, most likely a watchdog. Razor Moon has him present as the guy you execute to get out of the trap in Origins. I don't know what role he would have served, other than that there was an execution set aside for him. Maybe something like Ramirez or Pixie from Manhunt 1. Or what Danny does to Leo if you run out of time in release therapy. It's just the issue is we don't have any audio for that. We don't have a model for him. Outside of 2 possible candidates that exist in the 0.01 files. It's left to speculation. If we had audio, I'd be more confident, but the fact we lack any audio on Agent Prime is what makes me hesitate. What's also possible is Leo being a real person, which I know a lot of people have been adamant about. I think some incarnation of the story was going to have Leo as a real person. The issue, I think, is that there's still the lines of Leo saying stuff like, "It's a pleasure to be in your brain, Danny." And that makes me wonder if by 2006 they had already chosen to make Leo a part of Danny's head as part of the Pikmin project instead of his own person. It's possible that was an early call that got changed too. It's like the Domestic Disturbance storyline. I'm on the fence as to whether or not that would have been the case, though I lean toward the idea of Leo being real, based on stuff that's happening in, like, the opening to Sexual Deviance, or the opening area as a Most Wanted, where Leo is making an effort to do stuff that would make no sense if he was just a part of Danny's mind, like running away from the bounty hunters and all that. Something that could have also been present are the Pervs in the Safe House finale. A few mods restore that, including the Nostalgia mod pack and Razor Moon. And it makes sense. I mean, the theme of the Safe House level does tie into the exploitation of the Pervs level, and having them go after Danny and Leo as an act of revenge would have worked. And there was an aspect of dark comedy that suits the Pervs as well, given what the theater is showing during the gunfight. It's just kind of tough to tell. The voice lines for them survive in the level, and it looks like there would have been more space for the level to continue going on after that shootout. But, I mean, it still makes sense for the Watchdogs to show up in that situation too. It could have gone either way. Either Rockstar Vienna chose to just cut out the redundancies and make them all Watchdogs, or Rockstar London decided to tone down the Pervs' campiness by taking them out of that level in that situation, and in a way have that dark comedy of the dead serious Watchdogs there during the shootout. Tying into some of the level aspects, I think it's possible the window and broken window environmental executions would have been here. The audio for them was made, and while there isn't a certain location for them, I've seen people bring that up in tandem with the Sorority House. I think it's possible that if that level survived, then the window and broken window would have shown up there. But if the level hadn't made it, then I don't think we would have seen the execution in that build. And on the note of stuff that might have appeared in levels, given that audio already exists for them, same with models for some, the Blowtorch, metal hook, acid bottle, and spiked baseball bat. I believe they would have shown up within this build. There's a decent chance of that at least. They all have either audio completed for their executions, or they have models done in the case of the spiked bat. And they could have fit any number of levels. Maybe the History Museum for the Metal Hook, Ritual Cleansing for the Blowtorch, Origins for the Acid Bottle, and Bee's Honey Pot for the Spiked Baseball Bats. It's a shame the Spiked Bat got cut, because it's been cut from both Manhunt games as a result. But as for why they were removed, I mean, who knows really? Crashes, anything of the sort, maybe it just didn't fit the art style. It's tough to tell, because we don't have a definitive look at, like, how the game was handling it. Whereas you can look at the 0.01 build, and you can get a feel for why Rockstar London cut certain stuff to fit with their vision of the game. It's possible also that Assassination would have had the crane puzzle present.
Okay, we need to get to the other side. Try to shoot those girders down with your sniper rifle. Look around for some ammo.
Right at the start of Assassination, there's a part where a crane is holding up a bunch of girders, and they fall down and create a path that you can use later on. But Danny was originally supposed to snipe that out later on as part of a puzzle. The fact that it was still present and it just activates on its own makes me think that maybe in Rockstar Vienna's version, you were supposed to complete that puzzle and shoot down the girders the crane was holding up. And maybe it was cut sort of like the red light puzzle, in the sense that maybe Rockstar London thought it was too confusing or wasn't intuitive, and it would be easier just to make the game solve it by itself. That's more speculation though, because that isn't in the 0.01 build, whereas the red light puzzle is, so I feel like that would have survived longer. I also think it's possible that test levels would have shown up. We know there were at least 5 test levels meant for the game, including one that seems to have shown up in a personal PSP build, a patrol test, B05, which is built off of Best Friends, or at least it appears to, and it has textures for the Watchdogs and the Bloodhounds. Judging by the fact that at least one test level made into at least one known build, I think it's possible that more test levels would have popped up in an earlier version of Manhunt 2, even a version in 2006. If it hadn't been ready for release, then I think that some of these test levels would have been present. What I hesitate on is guessing how many of them made the final cut, because it isn't clear. None of them can be accessed in the public version of the PSP 0.01 build. So that's just pure guesswork. Something else that's guesswork is Frisbee, whose assets are in the PSP 0.01 build, but aren't really used in any capacity. Whether it's the Frisbee and the Freaks TV show logo, or the actual model for the puppet. I think there's a decent chance he would have shown up even as an Easter egg of some sort. It's just me spitballing, but I think maybe an early version of Broadcast Interrupted would have plopped him somewhere for the player to notice. Or maybe he would have, like, shown up in a TV show broadcast, sort of like what happens with 5 past high noon in the final game. But again, that's spitballing. We know by then they'd moved on from the Frisbee story concept, and including him would have been more of a tribute than anything else. On the note of Frisbee, I would say the last possible inclusion is that Rockstar Vienna's version would have had a dark comedic tone, and we see elements of that in the final game and in the 0.01 build. You see it with the cartoony sound effects playing in Broadcast Interrupted when you land headshots. You see it in the way you have to fake your way into the dungeon by using one of the Pervs' heads and pretending to be him. You see it with the choice of the pleasure stick weapon, the vending machine execution. Stuff like that is just kind of silly. Same goes for the Rockstar Vienna Toilet execution. It's darkly comedic, and maybe that would have been a running thread to try to tone down the controversy and violence of Manhunt 2 by playing up sillier aspects, like fighting against borderline robotic SWAT enemies, or inhuman-looking Project Militia enemies, or shooting it out with the Pervs while a very adult film is being played in the background. And maybe Rockstar London, or the main branch of Rockstar, just didn't like that, and they said, we're we're shelving this. You guys don't have a lot to show for your time, and Rockstar London's taken over. That is speculation, though. We don't know Rockstar's motivation for shelving Rockstar Vienna and shifting responsibility of Manhunt 2. That's just me trying to piece together this unfinished puzzle based off what little we know. Lastly, here's the stuff that could show up that I'm not as confident about. Stuff that I don't think is likely to actually be present, even in a 0.01 build of the PS2 or Xbox versions of Manhunt 2. Stuff that there just isn't enough evidence of completion for, or stuff that just doesn't seem like it would fit a vision that Rockstar Vienna would be satisfied with. In order, those would be references to a silo level. It could have been, honestly, anything really, even an early version of an existing level or one of the unused levels. All we know is that a level set around a silo was built or was worked on before getting shelved, and it seems like nothing really came of it from there. So I am doubtful that anything other than maybe some cut assets would have been in a 2006 era build of Manhunt 2. Same goes for the A13 and A19 levels, because those are explicitly labeled as unused even in the 0.01 build, which means either Rockstar London had written them off or Rockstar Vienna had written them off by that point. We don't have an image for them, unlike with Sorority House and unlike with History Museum or A20. So it feels like Rockstar Vienna just wasn't all that confident in those levels. Maybe they had those slots set aside and then decided to scrap them later on. Although there is the thin possibility that Rockstar London was the one to shelve them. It's just unclear though, because we don't even have a name for them. We don't have a basic idea of what they contained. That same thing goes for the bonus levels, because Manhunt 2 had planned out 5 bonus levels similar to the 4 ones that are in the first Manhunt. As far as I know, they never got finished. There's no inclination of what they contained. I don't really have a description, unlike the test levels, which at least give you a vague idea of what they were supposed to contain, like for patrols or things of that sort. I don't think the bonus levels made it beyond the concept stage. I think the slots were put in the level list just for future reference, and they were left that way when either Rockstar London realized they didn't have the time to finish them, or Rockstar Vienna just lost interest in making them and just focused on finishing the main story above all else. Now this one, I'm on the fence about, between somewhat likely and unlikely. Safe House has more to it than just the final theater shootout. More of the street and outside area are textured, and it feels like there are more spots that level could have gone on for, with Danny and Leo escaping from the theater and continuing to fight the Pervs or the Watchdogs outside. But I don't think any collision exists outside of there. I mean, I know there are models and stuff like that, but it could just be to hide the way the level looks from the window view. That way it still looks like a full street and everything else from your limited angles. There isn't proof that there wasn't anything finished for the end section of Safe House, but there isn't any proof that there was stuff finished. Hence why I'm putting it in the unlikely section. Something I am confident about is the heavy handgun in Safe House. I think that was a Rockstar London choice. I don't think that was supposed to appear in Safe House when Rockstar Vienna was working on the game, because in the 0.01 build, the heavy handgun isn't present. But it only shows up in the AO build before being taken out in the final game, which makes me think that Rockstar London was experimenting with that, and when they found they just weren't happy with that choice of weapon, either because it made things too hard for players or because it didn't fit the weapon progression, they reverted it to a revolver. I think that when Rockstar Vienna was working on the game, there also was just a revolver in Safe House, along with the shotgun and some of the other weapons. I'm also going to go on a limb and say the Hatchet in Altered State, the Manhunt 1 axe, the ice axe, whatever you call it, I don't think that had gotten very far. because all of its executions crash. I know that there's audio for it, but the fact that it shows up in the 0.01 build horribly broken makes me think that Vienna didn't get very far with it by the time they had finished a build of the game that they could show off to Rockstar. Tying into that is the Uzi with light and heavy handgun with light. There's a model for the heavy handgun with light that hasn't popped up before. I don't know if it's in the game files or not, and I know that there's an icon for the Uzi with light, but they haven't shown up in any builds of the game. I'd imagine that they were cut pretty early on because I feel like they could have been kind of unbalanced compared to the shotgun with light. Whereas you need to pump the shotgun every time you use it, the Uzi with light could keep consistent fire on you while keeping a light shining in the shadows. There's also the factor of maybe the recoil made the flashlight a lot less usable, where every time enemies would fire it, the flashlight would shine away from the intended target. Maybe that messed with pathfinding or your ability to track enemies, or for enemies to track you in the darkness. That's speculation, but I don't think anything was finished with those guns. I think there were concepts that were toyed with and scrapped early on. Something that I think won't be present, but not because it was scrapped, were the ghost watchdogs. The ones with the sinister-looking sunglasses and the zipper mouths. I think those were a creation of Rockstar London. And that's why I don't think they would pop up in a 0.01 Xbox or PS2 build. I don't think Vienna came up with those ideas because of my theories about Cemetery being a real location. There's also the issue of them being horribly broken compared to the other hunters, to the point where you need to do some fixes with checkpoints when restarting the level in order to make sure you can properly execute them. I mean, they work as hunters, but they also don't have any voice lines, and don't really behave in a way that the other hunters do. I think that personally, again, they were a creation of Rockstar London. I don't think Vienna came up with them, and I would say that if this build were to surface, it would be very unlikely that they would pop up in Personality Clash or anywhere else. And those are my theories about the hypothetical PS2 0.01 or Xbox 0.01 builds. I'm basing that, like I said, off of a lot of guesswork, and there is some evidence to back up what I think, but I really have to emphasize that I'm guessing here. There's nothing truly concrete outside of circumstantial evidence. It would be cool to be proven right or wrong, but there isn't really a way for that to happen yet. Hopefully a build will surface eventually, and we can see how right or wrong I was after all. Speaking of potential to be right or wrong, that actually ties into the last video in this series, one that I wrote up an entire script for, one that I'm very proud of and I'm excited to show you guys eventually. It is going to be a full dive through what I think Rockstar Vienna's 2006 era story for Manhunt 2 was. Level by level, scene by scene, start to finish, the entire story and what all would have entailed. And this will also tie into some of the theories that I brought up in my first video about the mysteries of the PSP build. It could get weird, and it's going to tie into some controversial points about the PSP build, including the last one on Danny. But, I mean, it's just a theory. I've been wrong about stuff before, and I wouldn't be surprised if I ended up misinterpreting their story as well. But I think there are nuggets of truth to them, and I'm curious to see what their reactions are, what the community's reactions are, since people did seem to enjoy my video on that. Anyway, thanks for watching, thanks for tuning in, and I hope you guys will continue to enjoy Manhunt 2 and all the speculation and mystery around it. See you next time, and take care.